Hey everyone, Joe here, and I've got sort of a hybrid lesson today. We've been talking a lot about composition lately, and this is a composition lesson. It's also an image editing lesson about some of the things that can make the image better, including one very interesting trick that I think you're going to find very handy that requires Photoshop. Now, the composition part of this is going to be more about balance, about physical size of objects and ones that take you away from the subject and what you can do to enhance them to bring you into the subject. Has to do with the size of the subject, things leading to it, and what surrounds it. Will also eliminate some distractions. So I didn't get to film this on location, so I'm just going to do it right here from my studio, or my office rather, and I hope you enjoy it. I'll come back and see you at the end. So here we are in Nantucket off the coast of Cape Cod, and this is a cute little lighthouse right in the harbor called Brant Point. And you can see compositionally wise, it's interesting. You've got the long walkway leading up to the door of this tiny lighthouse, but there are obviously a lot of distractions, and there are also some basic edits that really need to be fixed. First of all, you can see the horizon is slightly tilted. That is death to an image that's got the water in it, so we've got to fix that first. Actually, let me click into the develop module. We can see exposure-wise from the histogram up here that the exposure is perfect. It couldn't have been any better, yet obviously there are still problems. There was actually blue sky out here, which we're going to get back in just a minute. First of all, because it's driving me nuts, let's fix the horizon. So we'll go to the crop tool, come down to the bottom corner here so that we get our grid and just rotate it so that it looks like it is straight across one of these grids. And if you look just to the left of the lighthouse, you can see that looks pretty straight. Now, that doesn't look like a big angle change. In fact, if you look up here, it tells you it was 1.1 degree off, which is a lot. So you can go back and forth a little bit, and I'm just making sure the lighthouse itself is straight up and down. In fact, I've got one of the lines right alongside the right side of the lighthouse there. And I'm also going to want to have this thing be perfectly centered. So I just want to I'm going to crop in just a little bit because I want this lighthouse dead center in there. So let's hit done. Okay, so now it's straightened. Let's get through the basic stuff that needs to be fixed. Obviously, the highlights are bright, the shadows are down. So let's just cut to the chase. Ooh, look, you can see some stuff starting to happen in the sky, including some spots showing up. Let's open up the shadows all the way. All right, looking better. We'll go to presence and add some flavoring here. We'll add some texture and clarity. The sky is probably going to need some dehaze, but I don't know if I want to do it to the whole image. Let's try it. Add some dehaze. Actually, a little bit of dehaze does help the entire image. We'll still have to deal with the sky separately. And then vibrance, again, which will bring up the blues and greens, and which it needs a lot of. You can see we've got this great brush over here that is starting to show up now, and if we bring up the overall saturation to bring some color back into the sand. All right, that's helping a lot. So that quickly, if we hit the backslash key, you can see we've gone from there to there. All right, now it's starting to look like something where you can understand why I stopped to take this shot. Now we do have some spots to deal with, so let's get the spot removal tool, this thing up here, which is also Q, of course. Lightroom's crazy, ridiculous keyboard shortcuts. There's a big spot. You can see it. There's also one right up here. So we'll just click and drag alongside that one. Now let's hit the A key, which will toggle off the visualize spots option just to see if anything else seems to be sticking up. Because I wasn't sure if this thing right here was a spot. Actually, it seems to be a cloud. There's something here also, but we'll see after we work on the sky if it needs any more cleanup there. While we're here also, let's just go ahead and fix the sky. Let's bring some more life back into the sky. So I'm going to use the graduated filter here, the graduated gradient, and I'm going to come down about like that. If we come down the bottom and click show the mask overlay, one of the few shortcuts that is actually the letter O, and we see where it's affecting, and that's good. I want to take the lighthouse itself out of this selection. So I'm going to hit brush, hold down the Alt key, which turns it to a minus. So I've got auto mask turned on, and I'm just going to, I'm not at 100%. I noticed it was just doing it a little bit. My flow was down, so let's bring that back up to 100% so we can get rid of this stuff. Doesn't have to be perfect. We just want to get rid of, because what we're going to do isn't going to, actually is not going to affect the dark parts of the lighthouse. It's mostly the white of the lighthouse that I wanted to bring back. Okay. And actually the glass part, I want to leave that selected because you're seeing the sky through the glass at the top of the lighthouse. So let's hit O to toggle that off. I'm going to bring up the exposure a little bit because I'm going to add a bunch of dehaze to really bring out those clouds. Oh, and look, I told you. Look at the beautiful blue that was there. That was just lost in the raw capture because the scene was so contrasty that it was lost. And I did know it was there because I was seeing it with my own eyes. So on top of that, I'm going to bring up the saturation. And look at the gorgeous blues now. So I'm going to bring up the shadows a little bit on this area. Now, as we've done this, you can see this piece of the sky here has gotten maybe a little bit too light. So we're going to fix that as well. I'm going to bring down the highlights, but I am going to bring up the overall exposure a little bit more for this part of the sky here. And I'm going to hit done. And then I'm going to do another gradient filter this way. And I'm going to bring down the exposure a little bit, just so this white here isn't quite so pure white. In fact, let's bring on the highlights. In fact, let's even bring the whites down a little, just to add a little bit more balance. So now if we put our cursor over top of these clouds, if you look at the numbers under the histogram, now they're in the low 90s. That's doable. We can leave that. I also see that the lighthouse is a little bit dark in the scene. You know what? Let's cut to the chase and fix that as well. I'm going to get the brush, hit O to turn on my overlay, and let's just select the front of the lighthouse here. I'm not sure if I want the fence. A little bit of the fence is okay. Yeah, we'll just leave it. The railing's fine there. Hit O, and now let's bring the exposure of that up just to add some light, because that's where we want you to go. And by doing that, by making this lighter, that is helping the eye get along this pathway to the lighthouse itself. All right, looking pretty good. Now you might think, well, Joe, that could be done. And it could be, but we want to make it better. What are the distractions? Well, there's a boat right here alongside the lighthouse that's got to go. There's also a bike here, which I love. A couple of buoys, which got to go. There's this gray here along the horizon and the clouds. Yes, it was there. And I may lighten it up a little bit. We don't want it to be a focal point. And typically, bright things and warm things like a red will draw you. However, if there's one dark thing all by itself, that will also draw you. And I think this is a little too dark, so we'll take care of that. But first, let's get, you know what? I was going to say let's get rid of it here in Lightroom, but let's not, because it's going to be too complicated. As I zoom in, trying to fix something like this in Lightroom, it's not going to work very well. Now the buoy, yeah, we can go ahead and get rid of the buoy because it is separated from everything else. I can just click that, and that'll get rid of that. And we'll get a really little tiny circle. We'll get rid of that one. I'm not sure what this is. It's a distraction. It's got to go. And okay, it did a fine job getting rid of those things. But having something up against something else, not going to work. We need to be able to isolate that. So let's zoom back out. All right, so the image is looking obviously a heck of a lot better. We started there, and that quickly, look where we are. Still some saturation things. I want to bring up this red kind of faded paint. I want to add a little bit more to the green on the beach. But there's a couple of other big problems, but they need to be solved in Photoshop. So let's do that. Command or Control E or Photo Edit in Photoshop. Okay, so here's our image opened up in Photoshop. And if I want to see it in full screen, by the way, that would be Command 0 or Control 0. We'll just make it as big as it can and fit the whole thing on the screen. So here's our background layer. Again, first thing we're going to do, Command or Control J, or drag the icon to the little box with the plus in it. That creates a copy of the entire image. So the first thing that's got to go is this thing over here, this boat. Now we're now at almost 200% magnification, so it's okay that it's looking a little grainy. That's way beyond what we'd actually be seeing. But we need to isolate this and get rid of it. And since it is up against the side of the lighthouse, that's where the problem happens. So let's get the lasso tool. And what I'm going to do is hold down the Alt key, which turns it to the straight line tool, and I'm going to carefully select alongside the side of the lighthouse here where the boat is up against it, or part of it is anyway. Because by doing this first, it's going to allow us to do some edits and leave the lighthouse unaffected. And here's how we're going to do that. One more here. And now I'm going to draw just around this. So now I've got this isolated. So if I use the stamp tool now, it's not going to affect anything outside of this. Now it may cause some things that need cleaning up, but that's okay. So let's get the stamp tool, which is the S key or the cloning tool, whatever you like to call it. And I'm going to work at 100%. Now, by the way, I've said this before. If you're not familiar with this keyboard shortcut, it'll save you a lot of time when using the stamp tool. And first I got to set my mode to normal. All right, so how do you change the size and opacity of your brush when you're using the stamp tool? Well, you can use the brackets, and that'll make it bigger and smaller. You can come up here and you can change sizes. But what we really want to do is on a Macintosh, hold down Control and Option or Control Alt. On a PC, Control right click, drag left and right, changes the size of the brush. Up and down changes the edge hardness. Now in this case, I want it fairly hard. Now for opacity, you can see it's at 50% right now. I just want to cut to the chase and go to 100%. So I'm just going to hit 0 on my keyboard. And if you take a look at up here where it says opacity, when I hit 0, it goes to 100%. If I want a 20%, I hit 2. If I want 60%, 6. If I'm really annoyingly precise and want 35%, just type 35 real quick. But we want 0, so we want 100%. So again, I hold down the Alt key to click where I want to sample from. In fact, let's just come over here. Oh, we'll pick right in here. I'm going to click in there, and the reason I did that is because it's then going to carry that over here. And I can just reproduce that part of the shoreline, and there we go. Now I have this one repeating thing from right over here. I'm going to Alt click one more time. In fact, I'm going to pick a spot way over here because I just want to get rid of that one thing sticking up because it's kind of a repeating item and it might look like something's going on there. And notice since we have this area selected that it doesn't touch the lighthouse. All right, so while we're here, I'm going to Alt click again to get some of the sky and just go over. Now you might see what just happened. The sky over here is a little different than here. So when I deselect or Command or Control D, now you can see the outline of our selection. So now I'm going to make the edge hardness soft. And I'm going to work at about 50%. So I'm just going to hit 5 and I'm going to Alt click right next to it and then just start painting. And the beauty of working at like 50% is it is cumulative, but you can be gentle about it and just keep going over it until it disappears. A little bit over here maybe. I'm not sure what's going on here. Okay, there we go. So now we can toggle this on and off. You can see it's gone. Is there a slight change in the water here? Maybe. Let's do there too. I'm going to go up to 80%. Alt click and just, yeah. And by the way, when you're doing this, you want to keep moving. You want to keep moving where you select from because that's going to allow you to eliminate any repeating patterns that are one of the clues that the cloning tool was used. All right, so let's hit Command 0 to go back, toggle on and off, and great. Now we have gotten rid of that annoying boat. I mean, I'm sure it's a lovely boat, but it's an eyesore for our photograph. We're just about done here. I'm happy with the clouds except for this area. So we're going to let's fix that first. So I'm going to create a new layer down here on the bottom. Click the box with the plus in it. And I'm going to get a brush. Now first I'm going to change the blending mode over here from normal to overlay. Now typically I will fill this with 50% gray. That's just mostly so you can see it. In fact, let's do that. This is an optional step, by the way. So I'm going to go to Edit, Fill, and fill this with 50% gray and hit OK. And notice you don't see anything. If I change the blending mode back to normal, there's my 50% gray. And the way overlay works is anything that's 50% gray is transparent to the image below. And anything that is lighter, we'll make it lighter. Anything that's darker, we'll make it darker. So if I get a white brush, I get a brush with white paint in it, and I'm just going to work at 10%. So I'm just going to hit 1 on my keyboard. And if I start painting in here with white, all it's doing is it's lightening up at little 10% increments. And that, that's pretty good. That quickly, and you can come through the boat too, because the 10% white isn't going to affect the masts of the boat really. In fact, over here is a little dark too, so what the heck, as long as we're here, let's lighten that up. Let's lighten up this part of the sky. And conversely, if I want to darken this, now I can hit black. Let's see what happens if we do black. Yeah, see, you really can't burn something that's almost white. Oh, that might help a little bit. So what have we done? Well, if we come back over here and change the blending mode from overlay back to normal, you can see that's what I've just done. Those are the areas that this was made a little darker. These areas were made a little bit lighter. That's the beauty of doing your burning and dodging this way. You turn this on and off, and now you can see. Yeah, actually it did. Since this was not pure white, it was able to bring that down a little bit, and that's looking pretty good. Okay, now for the heavy-duty spot. What compositionally is causing problems in this image? Well, two things. One, there's a little bit too much sky over top of the lighthouse. If you actually just kind of do a measure, in fact, I'll get the marquee tool here. If you measure the height of the lighthouse versus the amount of sky, it's not too bad, but there's just a little bit too much sky over top of it. The walkway leading up to the door is fine. What the problem is right here. These kind of fingers or feet or whatever at the edge of the walkway are too big. They're too strong. They've become a focal point because they're so strong rather than the lighthouse. So is there anything you can do with that? And the answer is yes, and it's very cool. So here's what we're going to do. I want to keep my other layers intact for now. So I'm going to hold down, I'm going to come up to here, by the way. These 3 lines are the layer menu. And I'm going to click on here, but I'm going to hold down the Alt key, Alt or Option, and click on Merge Visible. Now, nothing changes on the screen when you hold down the Alt key, which is the secret key in all things Adobe. But when I do that, notice it creates another layer, basically a flattened layer, but it keeps all your layers. This is called a stack, by the way. All right, so here's our stacked layer. And why did I do this? Well, because here's why. I'm going to get the marquee tool. And I'm going to select, let's come up, take out the entire bottom of the image to there. And these are our offending problems. We don't get rid of them, but we need to lessen their impact a little bit. So here's what you do. Edit, Content Aware Scale, one of my favorite tools in Photoshop. And I only wanted to do it in one direction, so I hold down the Shift key and click on this center bottom point. And I'm going to bring this up. And notice it starts bringing up the bottom. It's making those boards shorter, but not affecting the rest of the image. In fact, even the stuff here that it's still selecting, it doesn't do it because this is a directional thing. And I think maybe about that much is good. Hit Enter. All right, so let's Command D to deselect that. And if I turn this on and off now, you can see how much less prominent they are. Now, we don't need the bottom of this image anymore. So what I can do is Command or Control click on the icon of the flattened image. That selects everything. And then simply come up to Image, Crop, and deselect. And there we go. And notice now we've got the lead in, but these things aren't so strong that they're creating a visual problem because they're so powerful. Now, the other thing is down here, these are a little bit lighter because of how the lighting was. We've compressed the lighting a little bit. Need to lighten those up a little bit. Actually, that's going to be more easily done back in Lightroom, so we will do that there. What else did I want to do while I was here? Let's do a little bit of saturation adjustment. I want this a little more saturated. I'd like to have this red on the boards maybe a little more saturated. So let's add a saturation layer. So I click on these, which are the adjustment layers, Hue and Saturation, and I'm just going to add a whole bunch. Forget what it does about the rest of the image. It actually makes the board, and let's not make it supernatural. We look like we're shooting with Kodachrome 24. You guys remember that? All right, but something like that. Something. You know, for those of us that used to shoot film, especially films like Kodachrome 24, which was a super naturally intense color, we grew up with that. Probably that's why maybe people of my age like our images a little bit more saturated, because we kind of grew up with that film look. Film did not capture reality; it was a supernatural reality. Or think of it as if you were wearing polarized sunglasses when you took this. All right, now actually I like pretty much what this has done to the entire image. Let's see if there's any spots of it where I don't want it to happen. Actually, you know what? I don't find that offensive anywhere. I actually like what it did. If you find it's too much, let's do something like that. So let's do a little bit more. Now let's turn that on and off. All right, so is that even too much? Well, maybe not, actually. I find it maybe a little bit too much on the lighthouse itself, interestingly enough. So notice when you create an adjustment layer, you get this blank, which is the mask. So I click on that and you get the little corner frames around the mask, which means the mask is selected. I'm going to hit the brush. I'm going to get a little smaller, and I'm going to work at about 50%. And I want to keep the edge hardness a little harder. We want at least 50% on that as well. And what I'm going to do is paint with this 50% brush just on the front of the lighthouse, which had gone, this color is maybe a little too much. Although apparently, really, I mean, the glass is tinted. Let's even go up to 80%. Let's just pull that extra saturation we had put in out of this. And now if we turn this on and off, you can see the glass isn't changing color, just the rest of the image is getting it. Okay, so I like where we are. You know what? I changed my mind about lightening up this in Lightroom. Let's do it while we're here. Let's create another blank layer. I'll change it to overlay. I'm going to skip the 50% gray part. You've seen what that does. I'm going to make this a very soft brush, 0. I'm going to make the opacity just, make it 20%. And I want white in the foreground, so I hit X to put white in. And I'm just gonna, look at that. There we go. That fixed that. I think the foliage over here maybe is a little dark. So I'm gonna go to 10%, just so I can gently bring up the brightness here. Even on these boards a little bit more. And I want to brighten up the pathway as it gets closer to the lighthouse, so that it kind of draws you in. In fact, I'm going to do the same thing for these railings a little bit on that side. All right. Looking pretty good. In fact, I want to brighten up the top of this railing, so I'm going to make this smaller. Here's another trick. I'm going to click here, and then I'm going to hold down the Shift key and come all the way over here, and it will draw a straight line of brightness in between the two. Yeah, and this got a little dark right in there. Window's good. Everything else is good. All right, the last thing I had mentioned was I thought maybe there was a little too much sky, which I still think. But again, I always do my final cropping in Lightroom because it gives me the most flexibility. So let's just save this, and it will bring us back into Lightroom. All right, so here's our image back into Lightroom. Now, I mentioned I thought there was a little bit too much on the top, and the reason is there's nothing going on up here. This is the subject. Yes, there's a tendency to get enamored with interesting cloud formations, but if you do, they have a tendency to take away from the subject if the subject isn't really strong. So let's click on the crop tool. Now, do we want this to be an 8x10 or a 16x20? Let's try that. Let's go to 4x5, 8x10. And strangely enough, I think that actually might be our winner. Question is there a little too much on the right, this sand where there's nothing going on? Let's bring this up a little bit and then down. I do need to keep the lighthouse in the center, however. Yeah, I think that might be a better crop because it's making the lighthouse larger in the frame compared to before. And I think we got a winner here. Two last things. I'm going to go to Effects and add my vignette. I'm going to pull the vignette all the way over. In this case, I actually kind of like the rounded vignette. I'm going to feather it a little bit more and then back it off to my customary 12 points or so. Again, doesn't look like I did anything. Actually, that's actually 12. 13 is a little high. Let's do just 7. And you can see when I turn it on and off, see that very gentle darkening on the edges. Now, kind of to combat that, and again refocus us on the lighthouse, I'm going to get a big oval, put it over the entire center of the image. I need to click invert, because here, if I hit O, you can see it's getting everything but the middle. If I click on vert, it gets what's in the oval. That's good. Let's hide that with O, and I'm going to bring up the exposure a smidge. It's almost subliminal. But what that's doing is making the center of the image a little brighter, which further keeps you from venturing away from the lighthouse. And then let's hit done. And I think there we go. Let's take a look at it at full screen. So I hit F, and there's our final image. And it certainly looks immensely better than where we started. In fact, let's take a look at the original. There's our original raw file that we started with. But by adjusting the light and the composition, we're able to draw you back to the main spot. And by getting rid of some of the extraneous stuff and some of the background, we've made the lighthouse physically larger in the scene. And by shortening the boards in the front, they're less of an issue now. They're less of a focal point. Yeah, you might start there, but now because the boards leading to the lighthouse are lighter, you're now invited to walk down that path to get right to the lighthouse, and it ends up being a really cool image. So that ended up being a really cool edit. We took something that compositionally had some interest, but needed help, and lighting-wise it needed a lot of help, and with a few distractions. When you're able to see this in your mind before you actually even press the shutter to take the picture, you're going to understand what you need to do. Also, when you're at a place like this, and I've been to this lighthouse a bunch of times, walk around, see what the possibilities are for composition. Think composition. That's the most important thing in landscape photography. And then think, okay, what kind of edits are going to be necessary to really make this image work? When you take the time to examine this scene, you're going to come home with less images, but the ones you're going to capture are going to be a lot better, and they're going to be much easier to edit because you thought about the final print as you were composing and pressing the shutter. For example, when I saw this scene, I could see the blue skies in my eyes, but when I took the shot and looked at the raw file, because of the contrast of the scene, the blues basically disappeared. So you see that they were there, and we were able to bring them back. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you had fun. A lot of cool tools that we shared, and particularly that content-aware scale to get the size down of some things that just weren't working. So that's it for this week. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again next Photo Friday. Bye-bye.